Welcome everyone to Straight from the Paws. Today I'm here with my co-host Beverly Andrade.
Hi.
And again, for a second part of our show, because Manny always has a lot of things to say, Animal Control Officer Manny Mayfield from New Bedford. Animal Control, hello dear, how are you?
Hello, great.
Great? Good.
Doing awesome.
I feel like we just left.
Yeah,
Yeah, well.
you know, last time we were together, we just had a lot to talk about, and you know, especially in the subjects that we're talking about, it's so interesting, and it's like a passion that I have, and you guys know what I do and what the passion is, and the same passion that you have when it comes down to the work you do at For Paws.
Thank you. Well, I know last time when we talked, we did a lot on Chernobyl. We talked about the dogs at Chernobyl. That was the focus of the show. We did talk only for, I actually timed it for 10 minutes on the Missouri 500. So today I'd like to do a little bit more on the Missouri 500, and then I'm going to let you talk about all the places you've been, like Oklahoma, Katrina, New Orleans, and we did a little bit on the Bahamas, which I have my books on the table again, just because I like to see my books. So the last day on the chain, we did talk a little bit about a dog named Faye, and I remember the pictures were posted, and the cruelty that was inflicted on Faye was they cut her lips.
Yep.
And I remember reading this book. When they went to approach her, they were all petrified that this was a very vicious dog.
Yes.
And then what happened?
As you, if you get a chance to see the pictures of Faye, you'll see what we're talking about. It's just the way her fangs came out, and like you said earlier, it's what we consider cruelty, but to the dog fighter, it's considered cosmetics, because what was happening with Faye, and when these dogs are in the ring fighting, and there's a lot of money into it, unfortunately, drugs, guns, and people do get murdered for when they're fighting these dogs for a lot of different situations. But in the case of Faye, she used to have the lips used to overhang, and used to get caught on her fangs. So, and she was a champion dog fighter. So,
oh my God.
So when they're fighting the dog and her fangs were getting caught and it was going right through her lips, it was causing blood, and there was a chance of them losing the fight because of the amount of blood that was coming from her lips, and the chance of her loss of blood and losing the fight. So what they did is they considered cosmetics. They basically cut the lips so it wouldn't get caught on the fangs. So poor Faye, being the champion that she was, and the dog fighter that she was, but she was like the sweetest dog to humans and to our staff that was caring for her in Missouri. So when we were there caring for her, the plan was they had made a plan to try to put the lips back on, because when you first looked at her, it was that, like, oh my God, it's a pit bull, which there's a lot of really nice pit bulls, and most of the dogs that go in fighting, they have to be good dogs, because one of the things that happen is when the dogs are fighting, they don't have the owners. The owners are not the ones fighting the dog. It's usually a handler, and it's also a judge in the fight. So the handler and the judge, the dog cannot react to those two. So they have to really love the human beings, which they do. They trust those human beings. And pit bulls are very trusting to humans, and they count on us to be there for them. And they really will give their all to make us happy in the long run when it comes to dog fighting. And even if you have a pit bull, if you ever come across a pit bull, you know what I mean. These dogs are very well-tempered. They love their owners, and they'll do anything. In this situation with Faye, when they're fighting these dogs, they can't react to the handler. They can't react to the referee, or then they automatically will lose the fight. So before they go into the fight, they usually get watered down. They clean them out so to make sure there's no any type of chemical that's on their skin that would make the other dog not want to bite the dog. So they make sure they wash them down, and it's just another way of them making sure that the competitive stage is even out. So these are not your backyard breeders. These are professional dog fighters, which is against the law. And they just passed the law too, not just, but about 4 or 5 years ago, they passed a law that bystanders now can be charged of seeing a fight, which is very helpful because before, if you're a bystander and you know now you can be charged for being there, which they also pay just like you would go to a boxing ring. They pay to be a bystander, and so they try to charge anyone in the field, anyone in fighting them, anyone watching a fight. So the whole thing with Faye, when she came into the shelter, which at the time was over, there was close to 612 dogs by the time the amount of animals that came from the Missouri.
Wasn't there there was 5 states involved, correct?
It was eight.
8 states.
Yeah, there was 8
But
states.
they call it the Missouri 5.
Yeah, the Missouri 500 because the actual case started in Missouri, and as a matter of fact, a good friend of mine's, Terry, he went undercover. He was a Missouri state police officer, state police trooper, and he went undercover for a year and a half almost, and he had 40 dogs of his own that he had to care for, and he was fighting the dogs.
As an undercover agent?
As an undercover agent.
Oh my God, that was
yeah,
horrible.
And one of his dogs, his champion dog, and the state police would only allow him to spend $2,500 on a dog. And he bought one dog for $5,000. He said he bought 2, but it was only 1. And that was the dog that kind of broke the case. He was a champion dog. And he got into all these bigger events and found out all these bigger and crazy events. And that's how they busted the case. He was undercover for just over a year and 4 months, a year and a half almost. And then, the minute you go across state lines, it's a federal case. So now the FBI is involved in it. Same thing with drug trafficking when you travel across the state. So there was a lot of that going on, and it was him and his partner that both of them was undercover, and they had bibs that they wear, so the dogs, they can put their leashes and stuff on the bibs, and on his bib had a camera. And now, since that point, they don't allow the bibs anymore because.
Yeah.
But this is still going on.
It's still going on here and there. Since then, since Missouri, I had traveled down to Atlanta back in, I want to say 2016, about 2016. I traveled down to Atlanta, and we busted 5 states that time, and we drove from Atlanta to Alabama was actually where we were busted.
I think the book has the Alabama story.
Some of the Alabama stories.
There's 3 stories in there. There's the Missouri 500, there's the Atlanta, and there's one other one in there.
Yeah, the one, Mike Bazzelli, he's the author of the book, and if you get a chance out there, look up the book. It's a really good book about dogfighting and the victims of dogfighting. We always said, when the book is named after what a lot of us used to say when we used to take the dogs off the chain. This is your last day on the chain,
Oh, I know.
sweetie.
I'll start crying again. I know. I do. I get emotional with this.
And that's why he had said that, because a lot of us would be like, we're taking them out of that situation. These poor dogs don't know what we're doing, why we're there, and all they're jumping and coming to almost like rescue us. And that was our thing of saying, this is your last day on the chain, baby girl or baby boy, and we'd take them off the chain. And these dogs would not be aggressive when we approached them. They're aggressive towards the other dogs, and that's what they're trained to do. And the way they used to keep them, in a circular motion, and that's all. Like, they had the dog house in the middle with a chain, and the dogs used to just go in a circular motion on a chain. And a lot of times they used to take the big wheel axles, and they used to put that into the ground. And that used to be what used to hold the dog. And the dog would just you could see where the dog was, and all that was evidence. And then they'd have the dog on the side of it. That dog would be surrounded by other dogs, and they're also dog fighters and dogfighting dogs. And they would just be just enough to almost be nose to nose, and that would agitate the dog. So when the dog actually got in the ring, it was like ooh, here's my chance. So that's why they do that, and it's a way of training the dog.
There's pictures in the book of them on cement, someplace in another city. They do the same thing. They had a circle of cement, and the dogs were chained to the cement,
Yep.
or concrete. you know,
Concrete.
concrete.
Okay, can I interrupt? First of all, we want to get back to the question about what
What
happened
happened to Faye?
Yes. So what
Thank
happened to
you.
Faye
You're
was,
welcome.
and you know, Faye had gone through surgery with the amount of time that she was in the shelter, and you know, it was to help her get adopted. And she went to a foster home, and she was getting ready. The folks that adopted her was ready to take her in, and she went to under surgery. The first time she went under surgery to add the lips to the dog, and the first surgery went very well. And the second surgery that she went in, she ended up passing under anesthesia while they were adding the
read
lips
that
to
in the
her.
book, yeah.
So it was tough for everyone, especially the vet that you know had to do that, because one of the vets was with her through all that time of when she came into the shelter. They do a total forensics on the dog, making sure, getting all the evidence of either markings of other dogs, blood and stuff to try to find out who the dogs were fighting. So this doctor was there throughout the whole thing, and so it was a tough day for everyone, all the people that rescued her, because one of the goals is to take these dogs off the chain, but also get them good homes, and that is the ultimate goal, is to really get these animals into good homes.
How do they learn not to fight when they're on the street walking with their owner?
A lot of these dogs need extra attention. They need to know, the owner needs to know what they can and cannot do with these dogs. They're not bad dogs. Like I said, they would lick you to death, but when they see another dog, they might react to the dog. So it's basically training the dog to make sure that, you know, a lot of times if you are walking and you see another dog, just cross the street. Don't put your dog in that situation. We have that situation now with dogs in our own neighborhoods, that, you know, they might be, you know, shepherds or cocker spaniels, or, you know,
Chihuahuas.
yeah, and little land sharks, and they might be just a pit bull or whatever. But you know, you need to know what your dog's reaction, or what's his trigger point. And a lot of these dogs' trigger points was seeing another dog and reacting to it.
You mentioned our neighborhoods. Do we have anything in the New England states similar to this, these dog fights?
We always say not in my backyard, but we had an incident going back at least 10 to 12 years ago in New Bedford. It was a drug raid that our narcotics agency had done, and they gave me a heads up that they had seen what appeared to be blood on 2x4s, blood on plywood, and usually that's what they do. They make the floor, and they make the ring, almost like an octagon ring, out of plywood. So and they also had like a treadmill, and one of the uses that they do the treadmill is they put these dogs on the treadmill and they let them go for hours, building that stamina up, so when they go in the ring they can fight for hours, which is very awful for these dogs, because
That's disgusting.
it's basically they fight to the death in a lot of these
Right.
cases. So we had that, and the next morning when we went down to the house, they had already moved out. That's how quick they were. They already
Wow.
knew that
Wow,
they were
they
on
knew.
by the narcotics agency.
Wow.
So it's not to say that we don't have it in our backyard. In a lot of cities where it's more compact with apartment buildings, it's not seen as much as in more in the, you know,
The rural areas, like out in
where
Missouri.
there's
Land and
like Dartmouth, Westport, where there's a lot of land. There's long driveways to get there. One of the guys, we did that bus when we went to Alabama. We went from Alabama. We picked up 21 dogs from the guy who actually gave us the information. And then we went from his house to a house in Louisiana, which this guy had 41 dogs in his backyard. you couldn't tell from the front.
Right.
But once you went up the little hill and over to the back, he had 41 of those setups all throughout the backyard through the woods.
Jeez.
And when we busted his house, it was, a matter of fact, the Louisiana SWAT team came in. They busted him, and they blew the door right off the hinge. And he was on disability. The state was paying for a lot of his housing. He had 2 Cadillac Escalades in his yard that he owned. And he had over $500,000 under his bed. So
my God.
when I say there's a lot of money into it, and we look at like Michael Vick, for instance, you know, here's a professional quarterback making a lot of money, and he got caught with, you know, dogfighting. And one of the reasons he got caught, one of the reasons was they were investigating a murder that happened. Again, like I said earlier,
There's
Yep.
murders.
that happen to this because, you know, you don't pay up or anything like that. They don't. It's a tough life, not just for the dog, for the people involved, but the poor dog always seems to have to suffer.
Yeah, the people
in these
have the choice,
situations.
the dogs don't.
The dogs don't have a choice.
Very
And
sad.
you know, besides the dog fighting, there's also the cockfighting that goes on. And we had done a bust in New York, and we did over 4,000 and something animals that we took off. It was like 20-acre property,
Wow.
and the guy was getting $60 per spot, and there was a lot of acreage. I think we estimated he was getting close to $30,000 a month just renting out those 20 acres for cockfighting. So,
My God. All right, I know I'm going to stop the book. I love my book. But we're going to talk about, you've been to Oklahoma, you've been to New Orleans for Katrina. So what happened in Oklahoma that you had to go through?
in Oklahoma, I have to say, it was one of my, out of a lot of my deployments that I've done, it was a sad deployment because one of the areas in Moore, Oklahoma that we were working on in 2013 with the Moore, Oklahoma tornado, it took out some schools, and 6 kids had passed, 6 children that were in the school. And we were working that area, so on a daily basis we're going by the memorial that they had set up.
That's tough.
And I have pictures, and I remember the day that me and my team, we stopped and we walked up to them, and they had just put these crosses on the school property where it was demolished. And we ended up I wrote, you know, my whole team's name on my hat, and then we placed our hat on one of the crosses. And it was really sad because, you know, it really hit home that, you know, what we do and what we were doing, the aftermath of not being prepared during either tornadoes or even being prepared. I mean, it's the weather, you know. We talk about like, oh, it's just raining out, but you know, the mix of what water can do. For instance, in the Bahamas, where I was just, my latest deployment was in Bahamas, and to see 26-foot water and waves coming in and
In the city, like in the middle of a city.
Yeah, it was actually the island of Abaco Island, and it was from one side of the island to the other side of the island. It was almost like 3 miles wide, and the whole thing was just covered 3 miles wide of just water coming in, 26 feet of water, and there was a lot of deaths that happened there too. But Moore, Oklahoma, I was there for 21 days. I came home, went back for another, came home for a week, went back for another 10 days, and it was heart-wrenching just to talk to the locals and to know like what they went through. And I could never imagine going, you know, something like this happening locally, and hopefully it never happens because it's just devastating, and what they go through all the time, and people like, and I asked them like, you know, are you planning on moving out? I was like, no, it's, you know, we hope it doesn't happen for another 10 to 20 years, and you know, they make their houses better now, and the schools will be better now, and you know, they learn from those mistakes, just like we did with Hurricane Katrina. I was down in Katrina for 21 days, and they learned from, you know, what happened. Like, I mean, we talk about how bad it was for the animals during Hurricane Katrina, but that's why we are today with, you know, cities and towns having to prepare for
Disasters.
and making sure that, it's not just cities and towns responsible. I said you're responsible for your own pets, making sure that you take care of your own pets. Have a plan in hand. Work with your local shelters or local animal control or local emergency managers to have a plan in case of something like this happens. It doesn't have to be a big hurricane. It doesn't have to be an earthquake, a blizzard conditions, or water. I mean, we know that a year or two ago, you had a situation down at Forever Paws, and,
Right.
and lucky we had a plan together to
That's
come
right.
together and be like, hey, this is what it is. So, as a shelter, they had a plan to be prepared in case something like that happens. All it takes is power outages, and you never
Freezing
know.
cold.
Yeah.
Yeah. I saw on, everybody knows social media. So if there's major flooding like that and people have to leave and evacuate, not to leave your dog tied up to the doghouse on a chain,
Yeah.
because that's a death sentence.
Yeah,
and I've seen it. That they've rescued. I've seen them walking through a yard using a stick. Right? You told me about that once. You have to use a stick because you don't know where a curbing is. They're going to fall off a curbing or where there's stairs.
A lot of times the sewer drains, the manhole covers will pop up because that's where the water comes out.
Right.
So as a rescuer going through this, they teach us not to walk. You shuffle your feet, so you can tell where the curb is. You go up and you shuffle your feet, and you see your feet go down. That could be a manhole cover. You look for situations like where there's lights on the house and it's flooding. It's like, whoa, the electricity's on, so you can get electrocuted.
But
you gotta be careful
you
in those
never
situations.
should leave your dog tied on a chain when you evacuate.
Never. One of the biggest things that we try to tell people is if you go, they go. Take your animals with you. Have a plan. You can either go to one of the local hotels that are animal friendly. Work with your vet either for boarding. Make sure your dog has a kennel cough vaccine, because a lot of places will not take your dog if it doesn't have a kennel cough vaccine, because you don't want to get
All their dogs sick.
all your dog's sick or your dog's sick. So it's important to make sure people say, when they go to the vet, my dog doesn't need that. I'm not gonna just give it the rabies shot. But all these other shots will protect your dog, because you don't know if this year you're gonna have a hurricane, or if you're gonna have a winter storm that you're gonna have to, board out, or even going on vacation and someone, you need to board your dog last minute. So it's important that your animal is vaccinated for those vaccines all the time, in case we have to go rescue your dog because you're on vacation and you get hit with a storm, or someone can't take your dog at that time while you're on vacation. During the summertime, you never know, you might be on vacation and get hit with a hurricane in this area, so you're not here. So whoever's taking care of your dog may not be able to get there, so the person who's animal control or the rescuer may have to go take your dog from that area, bring them into a facility, and your dog might get sick over it because it's not vaccinated. So it's important to make sure your animal's vaccinated. It's just being prepared, making sure when you do head out of the house or evacuation, take your dog's meds, make sure your dog has its, make sure you take your leashes. If your dog's on special food, take that special food with them. Just like you would for you and your kids, same thing for your animals. Make sure it's part of being prepared, part of being an animal owner.
What happens to the farm animals when you go out to these events?
A lot of the farm animal situation, for instance, the Westport situation, really close to home, and we never think it's not in my
And
backyard.
as of this airing, it's still not over. We're still in court.
Yeah, and it's tough. I was lucky enough. I got called by the animal rescue of Boston, who's taking care of that case, to assist them on that morning, and we have one of the big trailer that we use. So I went down there, and Alan Borgel had asked if I could, there was a lot more animals that they expected. So I ended up reaching out to the ASPCA, which I'm a consultant with them. That's how I get to Oklahoma and all these other deployments. I respond with them as a animal rescue team. So when I was in with the whole Westport case, I reached out to one of the disaster coordinators for the ASPCA, and I asked him, I said, hey, Tim, we're going to need you guys to come in and help us out. And I explained to him what was going on. So the next morning, he had one of his investigators fly in to Providence, and then they came down, and then from that point on, it just went in. But, something like that with the Westport case, no city or town is going to be able to handle that situation. That's why we count on a lot of the NGOs, non-governmental organizations like the ASPCA, the American Humane Society of the United States, International Fund for Animal Welfare. Those agencies are national organizations that come in to help us in these situations. So it's, like I tell my city all the time, like I deploy with them. I learn so much from deploying with them, and I also bring back a lot by deploying with them. Because in the situation where something was to happen in Fall River, New Bedford, in our area, obviously probably would be involved in it, just like the Westport case. And I can reach out if we needed more help, like I did, and they were there within like an overnight. And that Westport case alone would have bankrupted any city or town, or it cost the ASPCA over $3 million. By the time they brought the people in, and they brought responders in from across the country to come in to care for those animals, the food, the amount of food these animals. So the town of Westport would have never been able to pay and care for those animals. And that's why even now.
And the vet care. I mean,
I'm going to have to cut both off.
Oh, my
'cause
God,
we're almost
again?
done again. But I just want to let our audience know also that Forever Paws has always had someone in attendance at all the court cases. We continue to be advocating
the
for the
Westport
animals.
cases.
For the Westport cases. We continue to go. As Bev pointed out, we are on. We're waiting for a judgment case right now for the ones that did not plead guilty. The ones that pleaded guilty, unfortunately, got a slap on the wrist, and that's probably a little bit more, but in my opinion, it was a slap on the wrist. And those of us that sit through the grueling pictures and all the stuff that you people went through, and you say millions of dollars, the Attorney General's office, the lawyer is doing a phenomenal job. But again, up against all these lawyers, even local lawyers that I thought were animal advocates, don't appear to be, and
well,
that's a sad
it's their
case.
job, right?
I understand it's their job, but it's very, very difficult. Again, Manny, I want to thank you.
It's important to have folks like yourself being there to support the case, and so the judge sees the face of people that are behind and fighting for this.
Well,
so thank you guys so much for being there.
No, it's our pleasure. It's our pleasure. We're there, and it's I always forget the other name of the group that shows up. A couple of them show up.
Stop the Insanity.
Stop the Insanity from Westport.
That's the other group.
They're there as well. We wear our yellow volunteer shirts. We don't say anything.
Red shirts.
We just go, and it's grueling. It's it's difficult when you walk out of there. You want to stop and go get maybe a light beverage, so to speak, and relax for a few minutes because it's tough. But because of people like yourself and everyone else, the animals have a voice, and I think that's the most important thing. We can't thank you enough for all you do for Forever Paws.
Thanks for coming again.
And thank you for coming, and maybe next time we can get one of your colleagues on the show.
Thank you for being a voice for the animals, and it shows by going to court.
Thank you.